this little button at the bottom here. So if you press it for a while,
Okay.
so it just needs
So
a confident.
So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last session of today's conference, a poetry reading with Iryna Shuvalova. My name is Maria Grazia Bartolini. I'm Associate Professor of Medieval Slavic Culture and Slavic Linguistics at the University of Milan, and a member of the Italian Association of Ukrainian Studies. So it is my great pleasure to reintroduce Iryna in her capacity as a poet. So Iryna Shuvalova is a poet and scholar from Kyiv, Ukraine. She's the author of the award-winning books of poetry in Ukrainian. Her 2020 collection, Stone Orchard Woods, was named Poetry Book of the Year in Ukraine, while her 2019 bilingual collection, Pray to the Empty Wells, was called A Revelation by The Observer. Her latest book of poems and songs, 2024, is being praised as a future classic. In 2009, she co-edited 120 pages of Sodom, the first anthology of queer writing in Ukraine. Her poetry has been translated into 30 languages and published in Literary Hub, Modern Poetry in Translation, and Words Without Borders, among others. She herself is an award-winning translator, bringing modern and contemporary Ukrainian poetry to English-speaking readers. Her translations won the Joseph Brodsky Stevens Pender Prize in 2012, while her and Vitaly Chernevsky co-translation of Stop Sludnitsky Winter King was shortlisted for the National Translation Award in 2024. And as we saw from the previous session, Shuvalova is also a scholar of culture, politics, and society in Ukraine, and she is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Oslo, where she teaches all things Ukraine. So we will proceed in the following manner. Iryna and I selected 6 poems. Iryna will read them in Ukrainian. I will read 5 of them in English translation. All the English translations are by William Blaker, and 1 of the poems in Italian translation. So this will give us an opportunity to grasp all the different nuances of her poetry, and also to continue our reflections on the role of translation. And then after the reading is over, we can open the floor to questions, comments, objections, protests from the audience. So, Iryna?
Shall we? I think I will borrow this one. If it works. Oh, it does. Okay, while it works, while it lasts, I'm going to enjoy it. So yeah, thanks so much for consuming such a large dose of Iryna Shuvalova today. I really appreciate it. I hope we are not going to keep you much longer, and I hope you will enjoy the reading. I think, as I just realized, I will also be moving from time to time across the stage very discreetly to switch the slides. So please don't mind that. And you will see all the poems. The English translations will also be on the slides in the background, so that if you are more amenable to visually consuming information, so this is your chance, but you will also hear the translations read out. And the first poem I would like to read today, it comes from the cycle titled Kinechny Pisni in Ukrainian, which William Blacker, I think, wonderfully translated as end songs. So as Maria Grazia mentioned, all the translations read today are done by William Blacker of UCL, Iryna's colleague. And this is a poem that comes from the cycle that gave the title to my most recent book. And then the title of the poem itself is Vox, which of course is voice in Latin.
Would
and
you
I
like
will...
to have a slide switcher in order not to run around?
Ooh, if you have one, my goodness, everyone is so well prepared. So this is a communal effort. We have a slide switcher from one conference participant and the adapter from the other, and
it's the power of the word.
Exactly, and the power of community as well. So let me just try to see if everything works. I don't know where I should be pointing. Maybe not, but in any case, we will sort it out. Pardon?
The big one in the middle.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying, and I'm pointing everywhere because I don't quite see the projector. Oh well. The effort is nonetheless very much appreciated. Thank you. So I will be reading the poems in Ukrainian, and then Maria Grazia will very kindly follow in English and Italian in one instance. And actually, I might stand. Do you mind if I stand? Well,
I have no objections.
Okay. It's just it feels a bit better to be closer to you. Voice, голос. Так, саме так я й хотіла б говорити, як у шахту ліфта. Як говорить жінка, що палить на вулиці купу старого паперу. Полум'я танцює, але її лиця не видно. Я хотіла б говорити, як жінка, що не має лиця, не має тіла. Жінка, як світло автомобільних вогнів на стіні, що пробігає і зникає, не зачіпаючи нікого, тільки в кімнаті на мить стає видніше. You can hear me, right? Я хотіла б говорити, як говорять у замкову шпарину, у тріщину в цегляній стіні. Хотіла б летіти і не падати, як несена вітром пластикова торбина, що здіймається до 6-го, потім до 9-го поверху. Це так тече між будинками повітря. Це так течемо між стінами ми. Небачені прокидаємось, небачені засинаємо, нечутні кричимо, шепочемо, говоримо у ваннах, на кухнях, на пожежних сходах, на балконах, у темних під'їздах. Саме так я й хотіла б говорити, як спалах нічного вогню над морем. Як жінка, що співає, ідучи вулицею п'яна, так наче ніхто не чує, тільки Бог.
Yes. That's just how I want to speak, as though into an elevator shaft. I want to speak like a woman who burns a pile of old paper in the street, and the flame dances, but you can see her face. I want to speak like a woman without a face, without a body, a woman like headlights illuminating the wall, flitting and disappearing and touching no one, but making everything in the room visible for a moment. I want to speak the way you speak into a keyhole or a crack in a brick wall. I want to float without falling like a plastic bag on the wind that rises to the 6th floor and then to the 9th. This is how the air flows between the buildings. This is how we flow between the walls. Unseen, we wake up. Unseen, we fall asleep. Unheard, we cry, whisper, speak. In bathrooms, kitchens, fire escapes, balconies, dark stairwells. This is how I want to speak, like a flash of fire on the sea in the night, like a woman singing, drunk in the street, as though no one can hear but God.
The second poem I'm going to read was written during the pandemic, and I think how poetry can conjure up things, can make things out of thin air. And I feel like I needed to talk to someone, and that someone didn't really exist. So I just started talking, and by virtue of talking, I created an interlocutor. And so this Alisa, who, of course, the name Alisa, there are various ways in which you could translate it. And we spoke with Uyam about, should we make her Alice? Because there are perhaps some traces of Lewis Carroll's Alice in there. But in the end, we decided to keep her a distinctly Ukrainian in some way, but universal in other ways, Alisa. And so there's a whole cycle of these poems to Alisa. I'm going to read the first one titled Alisa Grows Up, which in Ukrainian is Alisa виросла. Аліса виросла, тепер будиночок менший за Алісу. Тепер Аліса ліктями підпирає власні ребра, намагається не дихати, бо якщо вдихнути, надмешся як повітряна куля і луснеш. Якщо видихнути, перетворишся на цятку і зникнеш.
Тепер Аліса затісна сама для себе, закоротка. Всі ми знаємо, що буває з тими, чиї ноги звішуються з дитячого ліжечка. Всі ми лежали мовчки у темряві, намагаючись заснути, відчуваючи вагу життя на собі, як вагу чужої ковдри. Вагу життя на собі, як вагу чужого тіла. Тепер, коли Аліса відкрила скриньку з секретом, вона більше не спить, більше не плаче, не кровоточить. Аліса виросла і вийшла зі свого тіла. Аліса відкрила віко над скринею власного тіла, а там нікого. Вона горобиною проросла крізь власний дах, пробила шкаралупу яйця і витекла геть. Розкусила горіх себе. Тепер їй гірко у роті. Я сказала Аліса, я відмовляюся грати у ваші ігри. Я більше не дівчинка. Я тиньк, я дзеньк, я дим.
Alisa grows up. Alisa has grown up. Now the rabbit's house is smaller than Alisa. Now Alisa squeezes her ribs with her elbows and tries not to breathe. Because if you breathe in, you'll inflate like a balloon and burst. If you breathe out, you'll turn into a tiny spot and disappear. Now Alisa is too small, even for herself, and too short. We all know what happens to those whose legs dangle off the end of childhood beds. We all lay silent in the darkness, trying to fall asleep and feeling the weight of life on ourselves, like the weight of another's duvet, the weight of life on ourselves, like the weight of a stranger's body. Now that Alisa has opened the box with the secret, she no longer sleeps, no longer cries, no longer bleeds. Alisa has grown up and has walked out of her body. She lifted the lid of the box of her body and found nobody there. She grew through her own roof. As a rowan tree, she broke the shell of the egg and spilled out. She crunched the nut of herself, and now her mouth tastes bitter. I said, Alisa, I refuse to play your games. I'm no longer a girl. I'm clink, I'm clank, I'm smoke.
And the next poem comes from the same cycle. A cycle is titled Alisa's Scars, Шрами Алісо. And a brief warning for the possible mention of self-harm or perhaps family violence. It's hard to tell. Шрами Алісо. Шрами Алісо роблять дівчинку дівчинкою. Без шрамів ти табула раса. Битви твої не почато, а отже гірше, ніж програно. Руки твої без цих синців, без цих тоненьких порізів, не руки, а лапки пташині, безсилі, не здатні нікого і нічого втримати. Алісо, шрами роблять дівчинку жінкою. Де тонко, там і рветься Алісо, там і гоїться, там і оселяється в нас чорнота, як у череві печі. Там бродить у нас деспокій, в темних дзбанах каламутна безсонна брага. Хто нап'ється, той без тями блукатиме, реготатиметься, через тінь свою перечіпатиметься, плакатиме, без тебе дихати не смітиме, Алісо, а ти. Шрами Алісо роблять дівчинку чортом, лавиною, чумою, стоголовою гідрою, богом із машини, здибленою рікою навесні, і ржавою голкою, піною на губах, жовтим звіриним оком, жовтим звіриним іклом, довгою ніччю без зірок, тінню, різзю, віссю. Шрами Алісо завжди болять. Алісо.
Alisa's scars. Scars, Alisa, make a girl. Without scars, you're a tabula rasa. Your battles are not even begun, and so are worse than lost. Your hands, without those bruises, without those fine cuts, are not hands, but birds' feet, weak, unable to hold onto anyone or anything. Alisa's scars make a girl a woman. Where it's thin, that's where it tears, Alisa, and where it heals. and where the blackness gets in, dwells in us like the bowels of a stove. Anxiety ferments in us in dark jars, a murky, sleepless brew. Whoever drinks it will wander, oblivious, laughing, tripping over their own shadow and crying, not daring to breathe. Without you, Alisa, but you. Scars, Alisa, make a girl a devil, a landslide, a plague, a 100-headed hydra, a deus ex machina, a roiling river in springtime, foam on the lips, a rusty needle, a beast yellow eye, a beast yellow fan, a long starless night, a wisp, a hiss, a curse. Scars, Alisa, always hurt, Alisa.
Before we continue, do you want that we take any questions, if there are some, to kind of just, pause a little bit in the reading?
Because this is very emotional and powerful.
Yeah, that's why I think, maybe we need a tiny break. No, but also, I would be very happy to take any questions.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
After we read these first three poems, I feel this inherent dualism between this willingness to transcend the boundaries of the body, like in Vox, this willingness to become a pure voice, like Orpheus in a way, and then this idea that the body is like the channel through which you experience the world, and you also get to become a fully fledged human being.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Well, we all know what happened to Orpheus, right? He didn't really become a disembodied voice. He became a disembodied head, right? That was still being carried by the river and kept singing. Alice Oswald has a beautiful, beautiful poem written from the point of view of the singing head. I would really recommend it. I translated it once into Ukrainian. But to your question, I definitely think of poetry as a very embodied practice. And I think it's not even about the connection to voice, because, that connection itself is an embodied connection. And I had this really, really interesting conversation just a week ago in Taiwan with someone who works on... who's a musician, an electronic musician, but also at the same time a scholar, working exactly on that physical dimension of voice, like the vibration and the physics side of it, which I have no idea about. But definitely, so voice itself works on a very kind of embodied level, but also at the same time, of course, poetry transcends voice very much so. And I remember what the discovery it was for me at one point, to kind of walk into this world of sign language poetry. And if you never knew sign language poetry existed, or sign language poetry slams, for example, I would highly recommend that you look it up, because it's a fantastic thing. So this is poetry that transcends both written and spoken language. It exists as embodied language only, and it's actually untranslatable into written or spoken languages, which is a very interesting thing, I think, to consider, even from the philosophical point of view. So for me, I think it's this is something that has always been part of my poetry, and I think also particularly when in my poetry I do reflect on femininity or women's experience. I think that's also a woman's experience is also, especially kind of as framed in our present day cultures, is also very much an embodied experience. And I think maybe that kind of push and pull between the desire to transcend the embodied experience or remain rooted in it has more to do with kind of how that embodied experience of femininity specifically has been constructed, I think, in many cultures. So maybe it's a desire to transcend that construction of embodied femininity rather than, the embodied experience itself, because this is something that I'm very comfortable with and interested in, and kind of can't imagine a voice or a poetry beyond the body, if that answers your question.
Any questions from the audience to our very embodied poet here?
Oh, thank you, I love that. Okay, then maybe we can read. I mean, we don't have that many poems to read, so
we're
let's see what
getting
we have
to
next.
one major poem of today's selection.
Right, and that's the ones that we will
Read in
read
Italian.
in Italian. So for this one, the translation into English is indeed on the screen, but you will not hear this translation into English. You will hear a translation into Italian. So if you wish, you can follow my reading in English if that's easier for you, or in Ukrainian, indeed. And yes, it's a poem titled Kulturny Szar, Cultural Stratum. А пам'ятаєш, колись у минулому житті ти прокидалась і неуважно краєм вуха слухала новини. Тепер це здається неймовірним. Так само, як думаючи про Бучу чи Ірпінь, уявляти соснові парки навколо санаторіїв і старих садиб, а не підірвані мости, оббіловані будинки, вулиці встелені густо уламками чиїхось життів. Здається, саме це і називають археологи культурним шаром. Хіба ні? Зняту з живої епохи шкіру, розстелену на землі кривавим клаптем. До настання цієї епохи ми недбало слухали новини. Жили у містах із сосновими парками, з драматичними театрами. Ми були наївні і прекрасні. Ми не мусили радіти одинокій капустині, дивом впольованій у порожньому супермаркеті. Ми були як діти. Чистячи зранку зуби, ми дізнавалися назви місць. Алеппо, Сана, Меккеле. Місць, де епоха вже звивалася без шкіри. Де шкіра її вже лежала, стікаючи кров'ю на землі, чекаючи на своїх майбутніх археологів. Але ми незмінно забували ці назви. Дочистивши зуби, ми вдягали новенькі конверси, купували в кіоску каву, забігали в метро, не перечіпаючися через людей, що спали на платформах. Ми були істотами, зліпленими з іншого тіста, м'якшого, рожевішого. Ми мусили пояснювати дітям, що таке війна, а як пояснюють, що таке Південний полюс або планета Марс, а не так, як пояснюють, чому не можна стромляти пальці в розетку чи вилазити на підвіконня при відчиненому вікні. Ми в тому минулому житті навіть не знали, скільки сталевих сантиметрів болю можна безперешкодно занурити у наші м'які, рожеві тіла.
The Italian translation is called Strato Antropico, and this translation is a collective effort made by our Alessandro Achilli and the participants to a translation workshop that was held in Turin last March. Strato Antropico. Ti ricordi? Nella vita precedente ti svegliavi e l'orecchio ti cadeva sulle notizie. Ora pare assurdo, così come pensando a Bucha o Irpin, immaginarsi parchi di conifere tra i sanatori e le antiche tenute e non ponti bombardati, palazzi scorticati di bianche strade cosparsi di resti di vite di qualcuno. Pare sia questo che gli archeologi chiamano strato antropico, no? Pelle strappata dal tempo vivo che giace a terra come un lembo insanguinato. Prima dell'avvento di questa era noi ascoltavamo di sfuggita le notizie, stavamo in città coi parchi di conifere, i teatri, noi eravamo ingenui e bellissimi, non dovevamo gioire di quell'ultima verta conquistata per miracolo in un negozio vuoto. Noi eravamo come bambini, ci lavavamo i denti al mattino, imparavamo i nomi di luoghi, Aleppo, Sana'a, Macallè, dove il tempo spellato già si contorceva e la sua pelle grondava sangue a terra in attesa dei prossimi archeologi. Noi dimenticavamo sempre i nomi di quei posti, con i denti lavati e sulle Converse nuove a prendere un caffè, correvamo in metro, non inciampavamo sulla gente che dorme in stazione. Noi eravamo esteri di tutt'altra pasta, più morbida, più rosa. Dovevamo spiegare cos'è la guerra ai bambini, come si spiega cos'è il Polo Sud o il pianeta Marte, e non come si spiega perché non si mettono le dita nella presa e non si sale sul davanzale con la finestra aperta. Noi, nella vita precedente, non sapevamo nemmeno quanti centimetri d'acciaio di dolore si possono affondare come niente fosse nei nostri corpi morbidi e rosa.
Yeah, thank you for this beautiful translation. I actually have been getting a lot of compliments on my translations into Italian, so I'm very, very fortunate. And yes, and we are heading towards the end of a reading, so this is the penultimate poem that we will read today, and it's called Vesper, which is, of course, the evening prayer. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about it, and I will just read it. By the way, I also realized we are recording, and I'm never in that recording, so I will.
It's going to be all about me.
For a little bit, I will sit here and ground us a little bit, yes, and create an embodied experience. Exactly.
You see, it wasn't that embodied after all.
Yeah, well, see how the technologies disembody us all.
Yeah.
So Vesper. Так важко когось ненавидіти після довгого дня. Коли відстань між нами ранішніми і нами вечірніми довшає, як тіні дерев на межі. Коли останні промені сонця ламаються, як списи об спину великого звіра ночі, що зцуне з-за обрію. Такої години важко сказати ранній, не гойся, боли. Серцю калатає, як дзвін на пожежу. Тілові скрутися вузлом і тремти, не відпускай. Такої години особливо непросто боронувати камінну ниву іржавим залізом. Наосліп сіяти маленькі зерна люті в чорноту. Сподіватися з гіркого збіжжя, гіркого врожаю. Бо, чуєш, уже відшаруділи в темені птахи. Бачиш, уже дерева зійшлися в пітьмі до воріт, а ті, хто скривдив нас, і досі блукають полями, не знаючи дороги, спотикаючися безпорадно в пітьмі. Зрештою, будь-яка рана – то тільки рівчак. Яма в землі, з якої видерли упертий довгий корінь. Нора, з якої викурили лисицю і довго гнали полями під дощем. Ринва, виїдена безпомічним колесом на розкислій дорозі. Скоро по неї прийде вітер, дощ, потім трава, берізка, лобода, пирі, реп'ях, болеголов, затягнуть нерівні краї. Земля залиже свою розшарпану пам'ять зеленим шерехатим язиком. От і ми забуваємо ненавидіти ввісні, і тільки ростемо, як трава, вкриваючи цілу землю своєю чіпкою, ламкою, нікому не потрібною любов'ю.
Vesper. So hard to reach someone at the end of a long day, when the distance between our morning and evening selves lengthens like the shadows of the trees at the boundary between two fields. When the last rays of the sun break like spears on the back of the great beast of the night as it crawls out from behind the horizon. At an hour like this, it's hard to tell the wound, hurt, don't heal, to tell your heart, beat like a fire alarm bell, to tell your body, tie yourself in a knot, don't let go tremble. At an hour like this, it is especially hard to till a stony field with rusty iron, to sow tiny seeds of rage blindly into the dark earth, to hope for a bitter harvest from bitter seeds. Because Can you hear? The birds have stopped rustling in the dark. Do you see? The trees have gathered at the gates in the twilight, and those who have wronged us still wander our fields, not knowing our roads, stumbling helpless in the dark. In the end, every wound is simply a ditch, a groove in the ground from which a long stubborn root has been torn, a burrow from which a fox has been smoked and chased endlessly through rainy fields, a rut carved by a helpless wheel in a sodden road. Soon the wind, the rain will come for it, and the grass, the birch, goosefoot, doggrass, burdock, hemlock will sew the uneven edges together. The earth will lick its great memory with its coarse green tongue. And so we too forget to hate as we sleep and simply grow like grass, covering the earth with our clinging, brittle, superfluous love.
All right. Before we read a very short last poem, do we have any further questions? And that will also enable me to actually find the Ukrainian version of that very short poem. I'm going to be frank with you, because I'm scrolling through the PDF of my book to find the right page. Any questions?
There's a hand over there, Natalia.
Yes, I have a question. How do you maintain an emotional link to the Ukrainian literary space? I think this is a question that I have, particularly for those writers who, don't live in Ukraine, but they are part of that space. I mean, Vasyl Makhno, who is a friend, he and I have discussed this a lot about how do you maintain that connection. And in your case, I wonder how, because these poems are deeply moving, and I have to admit that as a person who has always sort of been more in the political sphere, I only began to like poetry listening to Ukrainian poets read their poems. So these are very moving, and thank you very much for sharing them.
Thank you for your question. So I'm in this strange in-between place where I don't really have a home outside Ukraine. So I have been spending considerable time outside Ukraine, and every time I have been coming back. So I'm not even sure yet whether I sort of left. I'm not established anywhere else. But I guess I'm also no longer established in Ukraine. So it's a situation of disestablishment. So for example, the last time I was living in Ukraine was 2020, 2021 for a year. So I would always go somewhere. I don't know, I did my master's in the US and I came back for a year. And I did my PhD in Cambridge, worked for 1 year in China, came back for a year, worked for another 2 years in China, moved to Norway. I mean, it's being all over the place, I suppose. So I'm not exactly outside the community yet, especially because also now so many people from the community have been displaced by the war. I mean, I have been incredibly fortunate in a sense that, I have been just mostly living outside Ukraine for study purposes, for work purposes, but I have not, unlike many people I know, colleagues, those family members, etc. I haven't been displaced by the war. But I would say that this experience of being in between also creates a very different space for writing and speaking from. And I think that that's also something that unreaches the writing coming from the Ukrainian literary community today, is that many people are unfortunately under terrible circumstances, but in various in-between spaces. Spaces we haven't written from. I mean, I have been speaking about that, for example, with Iya, so we've mentioned her, she's probably hiccuping. In Ukraine, we say you mention someone, they will get hiccups. So I will write to her later and explain while she's been hiccuping all day. But yes, we've been speaking about this experience. So, for example, for her, it was an experience of displacement, repeated displacement. So first from Donetsk to Kyiv, and then from Kyiv when the full-scale invasion happened to Lviv, where she now remains, and that had a very big impact on her writing, even though it was, of course, a terrible thing to go through. And who knows if people would wish for this experience, but in the end, it did transform the way they speak. I mean, my experience of being in between places, also under a different set of circumstances, also definitely transformed the way I speak. And I hope that this will also transform how the Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian literary community thinks of people being somewhat outside or somewhat between places. Because I still remember very vividly, the conversation, say, in the early 2000s, when we would speak about, the diaspora as just something out there, those people who have no clue about what's happening in Ukraine, and, kind of a curiosity rather than, kind of integrate, like really thinking of those voices and experiences as integrated into the literary process. I think that has been changing, that has been shifting, and so hopefully, something something very interesting has already grown out of it. I just hope that the community will be willing to kind of digest this experience and reflect on it, and also think about, Ukraine and Ukrainian culture more broadly as a space for very, very different voices. So this also goes beyond kind of those on the outside and those on the inside, just in terms of geographical distances. Thank you. That was a fantastic question, and I found the poem. So let's read it before my phone runs out of battery. Various technical difficulties. So yeah, like I promised, it's a very short one. I think we do have it in the English translation on the slide. Yes, we do. Ptacha. That's the name for it. And this one was written in perhaps the next week or 2 weeks following the full-scale invasion. Весь день ходжу, тримаючи твоє ім'я під язиком. Вимовити боюся, бо випорхне і полетить, як птаха. Над містом, у якому вже 20 днів ніхто вночі не засвічує світла. Поміж зір, комет і артилерійських снарядів, чиї траєкторії насправді несповідимі. Птаха мала, з голосом великим, червоним. Птаха мала, з гірким зернятком туги у дзьобі. Втім, якщо впустить його ненароком, то навіть із цієї пошматованої землі воно проросте великим деревом любові.
All day I walk around, keeping your name under my tongue. I'm afraid to say it aloud because it might escape and fly away above the city in which for 20 days now nobody turns on their lights at night, between the stars and comets and artillery shells whose trajectories are truly unknowable. A small bird with a great red voice, small bird with a bitter seed of sorrow in its beak, and if it drops the seed by accident, then even from this mutilated ground, it will grow into a great tree of love.
Yeah, so this is all for a reading. I think, how are we doing with time? Do we have
We
time
have
to maybe
10
take a
minutes.
question of two if we have any. And while you're thinking about your questions, I will just do something I'm very bad at and encourage you to buy my books, because otherwise I will have to carry them in my backpack back to Oslo. So if you are interested, this is a bilingual book, so it has poems both in Ukrainian And in the English translations, they have been translated by Olena Jennings, a US-based translator, wonderful one, and published by Lost Horse Press. So we mentioned today they have a whole series of contemporary Ukrainian poetry. So even if you don't buy my book, please, I do encourage you to check out what they have in the series. And for example, Ostap Slavinsky's book that we got translated was Vitali, and Maria Grazia mentioned it earlier. It also has been published by Lost Horse Press. They are based in the US, and they do a fantastic job publishing Ukrainian poetry. So yes, please buy my book.
So Iryna, may I ask, so this book contains the original Ukrainian version and then the English translation.
Yes, exactly.
So I'll give a good example and I'll buy the first copy. If you
Ooh, fantastic. Thank you. So yes,
it's more.
thank you so much.
So follow his example.
Yeah, I mean, we can, if we still have a few questions, I think we'd be happy to take them. If not, we can just kind of... Yes, please show it to others.
A practical question. These are amazing translations. I mean, I tip my virtual hat in admiration to Uyam, who is a dear friend and a wonderful translator, but I knew him more as a translator of prose. So, are we expecting a new book of your poems in his translation coming out? Can you divulge a secret as to where this is going?
Yeah, so it's going in the direction of publishers in the UK.
Okay.
So we do have a manuscript more or less ready now, but because poets usually don't have the luxury of having a literary agent. So kind of, me and Uyam and I are kind of sharing that honor of being my literary agent. In a sense, we are negotiating with the publishers right now, and kind of, we will see. But hopefully, yes, yes. Thanks so much. So that's the plan, because I mean, really, Uyam's translations have been fantastic, and it was great to work with him on this project as well. But I recommend that you check out his translations in prose, and that Mike Johansson translation that we mentioned today. It's going to be a blast. I'm not sure how anyone translates such a complicated, multi-layered book, but there you go. People do. So I take off my hat. Any other questions?
Mine is not a question, it's just a casual comment after reading these last two poems. I really love this emphasis on the regenerating power of nature, this reconciliation that comes from within.
Again, so I guess body and landscape as a body are two, maybe, from my point of view, most dominant things in my poetry in general. And so I also think that there's a lot of discussion of the war now happening in ecological terms as well. And it's a fascinating discussion. I mean, Daria Cymbaluk is one person working on this, but there are also more and more voices kind of discussing the environmental aspect of the war. And also, I think in Ukraine, increasingly sort of the instances of nature healing itself after the terrible destruction, which of course is inflicted on the human communities, but also on the natural environments by the wars. This has been a terrific impact on many, many natural environments, the pollution, the physical destruction of them, but also this kind of self-healing that nature does. So for example, after the Kakhovka Dam tragedy, there are these fascinating images of how, what was almost a desert, the bottom of the reservoir as well, which is huge space of land, is now regrowing. I mean, there are various species of plants kind of growing there, and it looks completely transformed. Look up some images. I would really recommend that. And I think increasingly in the Ukrainian society that is also seen as a metaphor almost for this kind of regenerative power. And if that power is inherent in, for example, the Ukrainian land, right? It's also the Ukrainian people who are traditionally seen as very much connected to the land. We have been an agrarian society for a long time. I think that is almost taken as a metaphor that translates to also Ukrainian society, Ukrainian communities being able eventually to kind of regenerate from this terrible damage inflicted by the war. So I suppose for me it's a metaphor that comes very naturally, almost not a metaphor really. And I think it's also useful to think about this post-human kind of level of the conflict as well.
Any other questions from the audience? So I think that tonight we managed to plant our own seed of love and beauty.
Hopefully.
And please join me in a round of applause to thank our wonderful.
And a big thanks to Maria Grazia as well. That's it. We are done. Thanks so much.
Please buy Iryna's book.